Hi, Leila. It's great to have you here today, and I'm very excited about talking all things robotics, AI, and most importantly, about the bold vision and the belief that you as investors and some of our early investors had into what we're building.
Thank you for having me. It's been amazing to be here with the team and see the facility, and such a privilege to be a part of the company. So thanks for having us over.
Perfect. So let's dive straight into it. Tell us a little bit about you and a bit about your background, and then we'll jump straight into discussing more about robotics and the industry and everything else.
Sure. So my name is Leila Zegna, and I'm one of the founding partners at a firm called Kindred Capital. One of our defining moments, I think, was the ability to invest in a great company and a great founder like yourself. Kindred was set up about 9 years ago. And really, it was set up like many businesses are set up out of kind of a frustration of what the ecosystem and landscape for, specifically in our case, venture capital in Europe looked like at the time in which we set up. One of the core things was that there was a real lack of operating and founding DNA in the venture ecosystem at the time. I think it's gotten a lot better since then, but the year we set up, less than 5% of the capital had any founding experience anywhere in the partnership. So really the legacy was, a financial asset class, and these were sort of career investors and financiers investing in companies, which I think at some point along the journey of building a phenomenal company, it does become more of a financial transaction over time, and you're underwriting towards, public market comps, and you're doing a huge amount of data analysis and so on. But at the very early stages, as you know super well, it's a human capital business more than financial capital. It's about connecting with the person on the other side of the table. And I think that's a difficult thing to do unless you've yourself kind of walked in the shoes of a founder before. So myself, prior to setting up Kindred 9 years ago, and this is the same sort of DNA and experience of all of the founding partners at Kindred, is we were all operators and founders. And so I've always been fascinated with kind of the world of deep tech. And actually my business prior to setting up Kindred was also a sort of hybrid hardware software business in the biotech space. And funnily enough, it's a very different space in many ways than what you guys are doing in robotics, but I see so many analogies and commonalities. And I think the most ambitious founders want to work on the most ambitious and hard and gnarly problems. And now I get to work with a lot of those founders as a part of Kindred.
I mean, that's great. And I'll be very honest with you. It's what attracted us to work with you guys from the beginning. It was that empathy and understanding how hard what we're looking to build is. And also we were very excited to see the interest and the ambition that you had, and also the interest that you had towards the robotics space, which kind of leads me to a question on why is it that robotics and the robotics industry and autonomous systems have become so exciting and so hot right now in this sort of like new wave of interest?
Yeah, I think, you really sort of led us to the promised land, I think a little bit in that way, because obviously you set up the company at a time where it wasn't as hot, right? And I think the first, foray into building your first kind of fully functioning autonomous system was done largely in a bootstrapped capacity, because most of the venture community, didn't really understand or embrace the theme. So I think you've done a lot of the hard stuff already, which is kind of willing it into existence in absence of a market that, validates that that's a really exciting space. Now, to your point, I mean, it's all the rage. It is very hot. And I think your question about, so what is driving that? My sense is, by the way, there's both a challenge and opportunity that comes with it. I mean, the opportunity is a little bit of an obvious one, which is you don't have to fight quite as hard to convince people that this is an exciting investment area, or that this is a space that customers are really parting with dollars around. The challenge, obviously, is that, that means that there's a huge amount of funding that's going into the industry as a whole, and being non-consensus and right ultimately is where founders and VCs and teams make huge amounts of money. Being consensus and right, everything is sort of already baked in and hyper competitive and very saturated. What's driving it? I think, like all things, it is a confluence of a few things happening at the same time, as opposed to there being one silver bullet. I think on the demand side, there's a few kind of macro factors that are driving not just the desire for, but the existential need for implementing autonomy in, for example, a warehouse setting. And I think those macro factors are one, driven by a lot of the aftermath of the pandemic that we all lived through, which was a huge acceleration in the need for things like online fulfillment, but also just resilience in supply chains, a need for onshoring, for reshoring, for having that capacity sort of more localized and much more efficient. And then there's also this sort of supply challenge around just like the labor. There's a huge amount of labor shortage in terms of people who are have the skill, the willingness, or the ability to actually work efficiently within these settings. So I think there's a huge kind of supply and demand tailwind, and then there's a technological why now. And I think it's the confluence of those things happening at the same time, fueled by a lot of the craze and excitement and hype of AI, which we were talking about a little bit just before filming this, that in many spaces, it feels very much sort of selling the future, selling technology in absence of an application, or almost sort of selling the promised land without being able to showcase near-term ROI. And I think your industry and your space is a place where, real applied AI is a place that has almost an immediate ROI to it, and that will only increase as we move forward. So yeah, I think all of these factors from demand to supply to technology are the things that are driving its excitement today.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think there's the more sort of like conventional side of robotics and the fact they can bring so much value. But I think what you're mentioning around AI, when you look at it, we've been building autonomous systems for a long time now, and we've always had different embodiments of AI or artificial intelligence or machine learning systems as part of what allows these robots to operate autonomously. I think the latest generation, the latest progress in the space, especially around the latest tooling and systems in AI, really allows us to extract the most out of the data. And for us, the way we bring value to customers is by using exactly that, by using AI as a tool to really drive that last level of, or final level of insights, extract information, bring value to customers, and then a lot of the time we actually find new ways of doing things that we never thought possible before. And I think that's one of the big drivers. The actual physical applications of robotics are probably vastly known. How we use autonomous systems, how we create new generation of robots, but most importantly, how can we extract more information, more value from the data we're gathering, or the processes or the systems that we put together. I think that's one of the big drivers.
Yeah, and I think with hardware, for decades and generations, it was a depreciating asset that you would deploy somewhere. And I think, we live in a world now where these can be appreciating assets. And I don't mean the physical hardware necessarily appreciates with time. I think it's the richness and the magnitude of the insight and the cost savings and the revenue generation that can come from this extraordinary depth of data that these systems can generate and enable you to make use of. So I agree.
Yeah, I was going to ask about some of the lessons learned in the space, but I think you've just hinted to one. I think the very traditional sort of like industrial automation only robots are very different to modern robotic systems, which again are different from autonomous systems. And the way these systems can bring more value over time, a lot of it relies in that symbiotic existence of software and hardware. Being able to bring new software, new systems into the same platform and enabling that platform to actually do more is really what's going to continuously increase value or increase its value over time.
Yeah, I really agree with that. I mean, there have been so many lessons learned, not just in investing in, robotics companies and founders, but just looking at, deeper tech companies, real tech companies. These are products that really exist out there in the real world. They're not a zero incremental cost to deploy. I mean, there's hardware systems and software systems and middleware systems that all need to, it's an incredibly complex undertaking. So I think there are a lot of learnings in that. But one of the things that I think almost is a misconception is that people really focus on the challenge, the sort of multi and interdisciplinary challenge of building the technology itself, which I don't think should be underestimated by any means. And I do think is, a Herculean challenge in many cases to do. But I think it obfuscates almost like the larger challenge that we have seen, which is more on the commercial side. So it is not an industry where like, if you build it, he will come sort of thing. I think you need to be very thoughtful about working with industries that are centuries old, companies that are multi-generational, very large international, top Fortune 100 companies that have a way of operating and have for many, many, decades or generations, and not losing the innovative muscle that you have that sort of brings you to the table in the first place, but also finding a way to sort of fit into their needs as well. And so it's, I think, quite a complex undertaking to innovate around a business model, but not innovate across every dimension such that you look like, almost a threat or like an alien species to kind of the buyer profile. And I think that's a place that you guys have done a remarkable job of, not selling yourself as a robotics company, because in a sense, I think that really undervalues what you bring to customers and who you are at your core. And I think you're very solution oriented. So what is the problem that the customer is facing, and how do we solve that with a solution stack? And the hardware and the robotics element is a means to the end of getting them the insights that they need in order to run their business most effectively. But that's a very different way of talking to customers than the first generation robotics companies, which sort of sold a piece of hardware and sold it in a very different way.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think a big part of our success and what really enabled us to scale so quickly into the market was taking that step back and saying, okay, we know we can build incredible technology. I mean, we've proved this over and over and over. But if you don't start with the customer problem in mind, and very importantly, when you have this combination of hardware and software, when you have physical systems, you have to start being very mindful of the environment you deploy in, because you don't operate in isolation. And it's very, very different to a pure software play, which is less dependent on the environment. You can spin up machines in the cloud and so on. You can use different cloud providers. That's fine. When you have physical products that go into physical spaces, it has a completely different dimension to it, because you want to make sure that you don't change people's day-to-day ways of working. You want to supercharge existing workforce. Like we touched a little bit on labor shortage and scarcity of workforce, but it's very important when you bring this new technology, new systems into the space, into environments where people have been operating like this for years, tens of years in some cases. It needs to be a seamless integration. The better and easier you can make it to operate with new technology, the better and easier it's going to be for the customers to embrace and adopt it. And the other part of that, I think, is this big focus on the value that you bring is not by having a robot moving around the warehouse. Even when you look at more conventional and traditional systems like picking robots or forklifts, the value those systems bring is not that you have a physical asset in your space. It's the fact that you can move goods around, you can be more efficient, you can end up serving more customers faster. And it's exactly the same thing for us. The value we bring is the fact that we can extract these insights, we can extract the data, but then we give a direct solution to a problem. And I think the solution to a problem is really that commercial element that we were discussing. And that's why people really buy what you're selling, because you're solving the problem, not because it's necessarily the coolest technology out there.
Yeah. That is such a difficult thing, I think, from the investment perspective as well, is that you meet so many people who are brilliant technologists, and they get very excited about the technology itself. And abstracting away from the world of robotics, that's, I think, a lot of what we're seeing in AI in general today is just, and I understand it as well, is just such a fascination at, the sheer power and what it can do. But I think it's, from a business building perspective and a value creation perspective, a very dangerous and challenging thing to fall in love with a technology as opposed to falling in love with a problem space. And, everything else sort of becomes a means to the end of that North Star. So completely agree with you.
And I think it's probably quite an interesting mention there, the problem space, because if we go back to when you guys invested in us, we had an autonomous robot that would collect information from public environments or public spaces and then put that information on a map. And that's evolved over time, but from the beginning, our belief was that you can use this type of technology to acquire data, but the value you bring to customers is by giving them access to that information. And I think that's probably an interesting segue into building a full stack company, because again, in line with that belief, we said, look, there are no other systems that allow us to do this out there at the moment. So we've built the entire tech stack from the ground up. But most importantly, I think the big light bulb moment for us was, if you just collect data for people, is like you would, probably a good example, you would just mine or you just extract raw material, but you wouldn't really refine it in a way that people can actually use it. There's value in that, but very, very limited. So the big light bulb moment for us was, full stack actually means you can build the technology end to end, deploy it with customers, and make sure you continuously delight those customers. So in line with that, what do you think is, from an investor's perspective, what do you think is exciting or attractive to a full stack business model?
The only investments that we have made in robotics have been full stack approaches, which I think is very scary in some sense, because it takes a very unique team to be able to execute on something that is full stack. It is front loading a lot of the R&D risk, but I think it's from a capacity to iterate very quickly and to your point, kind of make sure that all of the value of each segment of the stack kind of accrues to the solution that you're trying to optimize for. I think you can't do it if you're not full stack. So, one of the examples that we talk about quite a lot internally is, and I know that you have a lot of admiration for the companies that Elon Musk has built, but is actually looking at Tesla in self-driving. And I think if there were one example of, non-full stack companies that like a lot of people would have pointed to, it would have been in autonomous vehicles, because they would have said, look, the car itself, and I know you spent a number of years also in the automotive sphere, but, it's really not about the form factor, it's really about the brain, the brain of the system that, enables full level 5 autonomy. And so I think you saw a whole wave of companies that were just focused on the brain. And, Cruise, I think, is a good example of a company that did that. And Tesla's approach was very different. Tesla's approach was, much more iterative, much more subsidized by customers, as opposed to being fully subsidized by venture firms. And so they said, look, I think right now we can offer an electric vehicle. We're going to work on doing that at ever increasing accessibility of price. And then we're going to have, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of actual machines that are out there in the world, picking up on real world data all the time, back to it being a data challenge. And then we are going to iterate through the real world, not through some theoretical kind of very bright people in a windowless basement coming up with the most exciting AI, but we're actually going to use this install base that we have and all of this data that's coming off of our systems to build iteratively more and more autonomy. And you look at where Tesla is right now, and you look at their market cap, and you look at their revenue generation, you look at their profitability profile, and you look at Cruise, which, by the way, GM has to report on because they're a public company. They've got to report on that, and they're losing a huge amount of money on it still. The revenues are minuscule compared to what Tesla has done, and so I think that's even in autonomous driving, where you could say the form factor isn't really where it's at. I think we have seen the full stack approach win. So it's a very hard thing to do, and 9 out of 10 founders trying to do that would fail. But I think the ones that succeed build generational companies, and that's what we're in the business of backing, and that's the company that you're hopefully building.
I will take the compliment, because that's what we believe we're building as well. We call it a career-defining product, career-defining company. And if we go back to the Tesla example, it's exactly that. It's the form factor of a car is one thing, but what can you use that vehicle for? And I think their approach to using the cars for data collection has been paying off, has been a very powerful approach. It gave them a lot of information early on. When you look at it, okay, it's an electric car, fine. Other people have made electric cars, but the ability to collect the information and then collect the information across a very wide fleet of cars, I think that's a big plus for them. And it's something that we're looking at as well. So we've released our technology into the market relatively recently. It's only been sort of like March last year. But when we look at the data sets and we look at the level of depth of information that we're gathering, it becomes obvious that what we have as a software platform now, we call it Dexory View. It's a visibility platform, but we have so much potential, and we're actively expanding this into a warehouse operating system, and we will be transforming it into a wider logistics operating system. So a system that allows us to go outside of warehouses, outside of our current ways of operating, to really to really empower the wider industry to operate at this 100% level of efficiency. And it's definitely what makes a full stack approach very exciting, because we have the control over the way we shape our technology, the way we deliver it to customers, and most importantly, we have the control over the speed at which we can bring value to customers.
Yeah, I think the ability to become the operating system on which all of these, frankly, existential, sort of crucially important to society, to the fabric of how we all live and work and get our goods and services and so on. I think that is a hugely exciting proposition, and the wedge to get there, I think, looks like a really exciting one in terms of what you're doing and tapping into the spine, essentially, and really understanding, the digital twin of a space where things are accurately on a daily basis to be able to route and optimize all the other systems that operate within that sphere.
I think the next question I will wanted to ask you is a little bit broader and more related to the investor industry. How do you feel that other investors and investors in the space can help companies scale at the global level, and what do you see in the industry transitioning for better, I hope, and what do you feel other funds should be doing more of?
I mean, we do see a lot of investment coming into the space, which is, as I said, both an opportunity and a challenge. I think, by way of advice almost to the investment community, I would really encourage people to focus on entrepreneurs and founders who have a specific problem or pain point in mind, and they're really focused on solutions around that problem. And as I said, sort of abstracting away the technology, and you have had a number of different twists and turns on the road to kind of building to where you are today. And had you doggedly and dogmatically stuck to what you initially said, because that's what you raised money on, you would never be in the position that you're in today. And so I think it's really focusing on a problem space and then building a technology stack that serves that well and iterating and evolving that as needed. And I think a frustration, I guess, that I have a bit in kind of what we're seeing in the funding landscape today is that there are a bunch of technologies that are looking for a problem to solve that are raising enormous sums of money. And they're raising them pre-product and they're raising them pre-revenue, and there isn't a customer readout. And so it's easier to sell a vision than the minute you have data. As you know well, people start to scrutinize the data. But I worry that those won't work out as well, and then it will cast a shadow essentially on the industry, saying, well, these things are really hard and it's called hardware for a reason, and so we shouldn't back them. And you get, we always get hype cycles that peak and trough. I think we are much more in peak territory than trough territory, and I think that's where sometimes, not always the most rational approaches to things get backed. So I think we have to recognize that. I think it distorts the industry to an extent. But again, back to Tesla, my sense is the best form of capital, and I'm saying this as a venture capitalist, but the best source of capital is capital from customers. The best, subsidization you can get is subsidization from customers. And it's because it's the smartest capital you can find. The readout is whether or not they part with the expansion money. It's whether they buy your next module. And that gives you much more of a read on, is the vector in the right direction for you guys, as opposed to one investor on the face of the planet that parts with some money and tells you that they believe. So yeah, I think it's an exciting time to be investing in this space. I think you've got to be very thoughtful about picking who you invest in and what journeys they're on. And I would say really focus from the application side on the problem and not the technology itself.
That's very insightful. So thank you for that. And if we were to wrap it up, what is the thing that excites you most about the future in I would say in the AI and robotics space and the wider sort of like hard industry full stack space?
Well, I think it's two things. I think one is it is such an interdisciplinary undertaking to get one of these companies to escape velocity. These are really hard problems almost that exist across the board, from how to, build the hardware systems, integrate them in full workflows, figure out how to sell into a traditional customer base, maintain the innovation muscle with the, recognition and due respect for the industry that you're selling into and so on. So I just find really hard, challenging problems exciting, and it's hard to find a harder problem than the space that you guys are building within. So I think that's super exciting, and it's not for the faint-hearted. And so it almost self-selects a certain type of founder, a certain type of team that's sort of willing to work in those spaces. So as an investor, I think that's the most rewarding bit. And then I think there's a mission piece. And for me, I'm a very mission-oriented person, and we founded our firm on a mission, and I really respect the missions that our teams are on. And I do think there is an enormous societal benefit to the ability to enable these systems to be as productive and as resilient as we as consumers need them to be. And we all had personal experiences of that when the world shut down a few years ago. And I think what you're doing has an enormous ripple effect on people's ability to feel confident that, in fair weather and bad weather, we have systems in place that can help us continue and progress and continue to move forward. So yeah, it's an honor to be a part of the complexity and challenge that you're undertaking, but also the great mission as and when you're successful.
Thank you for that. And obviously, what you said earlier really resonated with me, because you guys have supported us through various pivots and transitions. And I think that's a very important bit of advice for other investors coming in the space. It's never crystal clear when you build something so complex what the winning combination, solution, or formula, or most importantly, what the market wants from your technology. So I think that ability to support these companies through various exploration phases and the way they adapt the technology to the product and the customer needs, I think that's been incredibly helpful for us over years. So a big thank you for that. And I will definitely share that as advice, my understanding of advice coming from you for other investors and also for founders in the space. Start with a problem that you're solving, the customer problem, and make sure you keep that innovation muscle active to adapt the technology and best answer that problem over time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It was great to talk to you today.
Thank you.